want to show you the difference between these two blocks, especially the quilting that I did in them. It's the same quilting design. The only thing that is different is the thread color. This I used a little bit darker thread than this one here. And of course I did this block first. I always go left to right. And I chose this thread because I was planning on using the same thread color throughout the entire quilt, which included the sashing. And this color worked better with the sashing. This is, I believe this is parchment, and this was whole wheat. This was a signature thread. This is YLI. And I didn't like the way this looked in the yellow. So, you know, it looked okay in the block, but I didn't like the way it looked in the yellow. So I decided to switch thread colors and then try another block. So now I have the option of ripping this out and doing it again, or just leaving it there as kind of like an a humble block. And for right now, I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to rip it out. This is what happens to me when I'm tired and I decide I'm going to quilt anyway. And so I'm going to either have to live with this or rip it out. And this isn't dense quilting, so it isn't really going to be difficult to rip out, but still ripping out quilting is going to take time. For about every 5 minutes I quilt, it takes about 20 to 25 minutes to rip out. So I'm not going to work on this tonight. I've shut the machine down, but I did wanted you to see that thread color can make a difference, and see if you can get a little closer up view. But you can see the colors from this point of view, but if you look here, you can see how that really stands out. And it stands out in the yellow, but it doesn't in the patterned fabric where the star is. And then when we look over here, you can see the texture of the quilting, but you don't see that thread as much. So that gives me more of the look that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the textures and not the color of the thread. So I think this is going to be a better choice. And when I get back to quilting on this quilt, I'm going to go with this color thread here. Another thing I wanted to show you on this block is this block does have some fullness in it. You can see right here. And I was able to quilt it without any puckers. Well, maybe I do have a little one here. But I'm going to rip the stitching out anyway. So I'll see if I can get it a little smoother. But I have mentioned before in vintage tops, I don't work myself to death to get all these puckers out, because these have been set in here for years. And this is a 1930s quilt. You know, we're looking at almost 70 years of this being in here. So actually almost 80 years of this being in here. So it's just not something that I'm going to work real hard at. I will do my best, but I'm not going to kill myself over this. So I will get back to quilting tomorrow or the next day and show you a little bit more of how this is going. Well, I just got finished ripping out the quilting in this block, all except for these petals. And I think it took me about, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes to quilt this in. It took me 40 minutes to pull these stitches out. And, you know, this wasn't heavy quilting, so it was kind of a time-consuming mistake, but I'm glad I took it out, and it'll look better with the lighter thread. Now I'm going to leave this in here, and the reason is, excuse me, I'm trying to get closer here. The reason is you really can't, this looks fine, it doesn't look bad, and I really don't want to take another 40 minutes to rip the stitching out to quilt another thread color in here that's actually not going to look much different. So I'm going to leave it, and I think the only way anybody's going to tell from a distance is if they looked at the back of the quilt, and you know, I don't care if they see it or not. I'm just going to leave it. This is my quilt, and I think I'm done with ripping out stitches, so I am just going to leave it the way it is. And I'm going to go ahead and do some more quilting and show you a little bit more when I get done. As I usually do, I'm starting in the center of this block, quilting in the feathers, and these are the feathers that all come together at one point in the center of that hexagon, and this will make it look more like a flower. And the thread is the lighter colored thread. This is the Parchment by YLI, and I am on stitch regulated mode. I did this entire quilt on stitch regulated mode, and I think it turned out pretty well doing it that way. And you may notice as you're watching this video that I didn't use any rulers on this quilt, so this kind of simplified the process. It was more of a it was all free motion quilting, and so I think this is something that if you're a beginner, this is something that you could try, and I think you would be successful at it. These are all pretty basic shapes. The most complex part of this would be that feather in the center, and it's small, so I think if you practice that for a couple of times, I think you would be able to get that and get this type of a block done pretty easily. And these are techniques that you could use in different types of blocks also. So I am in the stitch regulated mode and just taking my time. You notice that I'm not going very fast on this. This is just one of those blocks where I'm taking my time a lot because I am following the ditch for the base of those petals there, and to keep from quilting on the wrong side of that ditch, I need to slow down so I can be pretty accurate on where that quilting line is going. So I'm going to break thread again, and then I'm going to work on the background of this block, and just going to get those threads out of my way, and then start in the upper corner there. And this is where I'll put in the crossed canoes. Now there are a lot of different designs you could put in these squares and in these triangles. This is just one that I've been doing a little bit more of lately than what I have in the past, and it's just because it's, you know, I kind of get tired of doing the same thing over and over again, and so I'll switch to something else, and it just kind of keeps me going, keeps me interested. And in the next quilt I'll do something completely different. I won't do these designs, so I'll switch out and do something different in every quilt. But when I have I just completed a sampler quilt. The Broken Star Quilt is filled with different blocks, and with those I did very similar designs in the background of the blocks in there, and that just kind of simplified the process so that I didn't have to think of a different design for every background of every block. About half of the blocks I did the same design. So here we are, we're almost finished with this block, and I think that's just the right amount of quilting for this quilt. The fabrics they feel a little bit fragile. They're very thin. If you held that block up, you could see through it, so I felt it just needed some light quilting. Okay, I'm getting ready to do the sashing in this quilt top, and I wanted to show you how I'm going to do this. I'm going to show you, I'll draw them out with chalk. Hopefully this will show up, and then if not, I'll go ahead and do the plastic overlay. But I'm going to do one big swirl. I'm going to come back up near the top and then do a little swirl, and then come back to the center where those two meet And then I'm going to come in and do a large swirl that goes in the opposite direction from this one. Then come back down to the bottom, make a small swirl, come back to the center, and then make the large swirl. So we're repeating this part here. And then come back up and then do a small swirl. So this is what is going to go in this sashing. So I'm going to quilt this in for you, and we'll see how that goes. Now the thread I'm using is the darker thread. This is Baguette by Signature. It's 100% cotton. And I chose that because I think it blends better with the green than the parchment did. The parchment is what I used in the quilt blocks. And I thought that might be a little too contrasting. I wanted something that would blend a little bit more. So we're going to use this thread, and I'm going to lock my stitches in the seam line, and I am on stitch regulated mode. So we'll see how this goes. I'm going to tie off, and you'll notice that I didn't stay right on the lines I had drawn. I kind of just went by feel as to how big all of these swirls needed to be to fit into the space. Now I could have, when I came back here and tied off, I could have come here and put another swirl in, but I chose not to. So this is what I'm going to do, and the borders are in the sashing of this quilt. And when I get done doing all of the horizontal sashings, these short ones, I will do these longer sashes. This sash goes all the way down to the bottom of the quilt, and I'll do this all in one continuous motion. And I don't think I'm going to turn the quilt. I think I'll just leave it as it is, and I'll just roll the quilt forward as I need to. Okay, I want to show you how I'm stitching the quilting in these sashes here. I decided that I'm going to be rolling the quilt just one time for each row, which that did not turn out right. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be quilting across the top as far down on this sashing as I can get, break the thread, move on to the next sashing, and then roll the quilt and then start again. So up in here where there is a crevice where these two swirls meet, that is where I'm going to start my quilting again. So this has got the large swirl and then the small. So I'm going to come in with the large swirl going this direction, small on the top, and then come down with the big swirl, small on the bottom. So I'm going to hide my stop and start right in here. See if I can get that a little closer for you. I'm having trouble seeing myself. Here we go. So right in here is where I'm going to hide my stop and start. So I'll show you a little bit of how I'm doing that. So I'm just going to take a few stitches here to secure them, and then I'm just going to start quilting. So that will hide those stops and starts. This is definitely not a show quilt, so I'm really not worried about that showing, but that is a good place if you have a quilt that you're doing for a customer, or one that's special and you don't want your stops and starts to show that much. Hide it in a crevice where two stitching lines come together. You can hide your stop and start in there, and then unless you're looking really closely, you won't even know where you did that. Okay, I want to show you this quilt now that it's all finished and I've got it pinned up on my design wall. I want to show you some of the idiosyncrasies of this quilt, some of the quirks that it has, and explain to you my reasoning behind leaving things the way they are. You will notice up here, first off, you'll notice this edge, how far this edge leans out compared to this side of the quilt. And I left this like that, and I wanted to show you why. Here is, if I had squared this quilt up, that's how much of that block I would have cut off. I would have cut off all of this. And so we would have had about this much of the block. That's all that would have been left. To me, that would have looked worse than leaving it the way it is. So I just left it, and I have a couple of edges near the top that are the same way. They're very wavy, and I could have squared them up and cut off quite a bit of the tips of those star points, and I chose not to. You know, that's all up to you. What do you want to do? Is the square quilt more important to you than the full design? You know, whatever works for you is what you need to do. But for me, I decided to let it be itself and just work with it the way it was. And to bind it, I cut the binding on the bias so that it would bend around these curves real easily, and so the binding wasn't a problem with putting it on. It went on real easily. It's not going to show because this quilt is not going to be on display the way it is right now. This quilt is, I finished it so that it could be used. So it will either be like laying on a bed, or it'll be maybe folded up at the end of my couch. You know, it'll be somewhere where that's not going to be noticeable. And even if it is, I don't care. These vintage quilts have their little personalities, and that's what this one is. It's not perfect, and hardly any of the vintage tops that I picked up are perfect. And that just comes with the fact that they are hand pieced. The way they cut out the pieces, they probably used cardboard templates. And then each time you trace around one of those templates, you distort the shape a little bit. So it's really difficult to get hand pieced quilt tops that are pieced perfectly. They just aren't. And even nowadays with our rotary cutters and our die cutters, there's so many different elements that go into making the top or the block that it's hard to get them perfect. And that's just the way it is. So I'm happy with the way it turned out. I wasn't sure I liked this quilt when I first started working on it. I chose it, when I chose it at the antique shop, I chose it because I liked the pattern. I wasn't crazy about the colors. This yellow is just not my color. I prefer more blues and purples, and this is green and yellow and browns, and it's more of a warm tone quilt. It's good for the fall. It's like a fall quilt. So you know, but I'm really glad I did it. I like the way it turned out. The quilting made a big difference on this quilt, so I'm happy with it. And with its quirks and all, it just has a little personality all its own, and I quite like it now. So I hope this video gave you some tips that you can use, and I thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links. And to keep up with my newest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.